Professionally, he's someone who had risen to national fame. This is a man who's not just a celebrity after his lifespan, not just in memory, but during his lifetime was a national celebrity. He had risen to become a brigadier general at the age of 23. As many people who are familiar with Custer's story will note, he had graduated last in his class at West Point in 1861, but first in demerits. This is a man who had struggled along as a junior officer. Under ordinary circumstances, graduating last in your class in the regular Army would put you at the bottom of the promotion list. But these were not regular times. George Armstrong Custer was one of the few people for whom the outbreak of the nation's bloodiest war was an incredibly lucky event. When he went to war as a young man, he turned from being the kind of reckless, self-indulgent youth to someone who really had a sense of purpose. And there's no hint in the writing about him from his commanders, their reports, or his career of that self-indulgent, rule-disobeying young man at West Point. I think in part there's a reason for that I'll get to later when I talk about his personal life, but it gave him purpose. He begins to perform well. And he takes part in a raid during the Peninsula Campaign that lifts him to the attention of the commander of Union forces, Major General George McClellan, and McClellan appoints him to his staff. From there, he's both showing his personal talent and his merit, but he's also very adroitly working the chains of patronage. And when McClellan falls, Custer survives, and he lands on General Pleasanton's staff, the head of the Union cavalry eventually, in the Army of the Potomac. And when Lee invades the North, that gives Pleasanton an opportunity to shake up the command structure, and he has Custer appointed as a brigadier general at the age of 23. Custer went almost directly to the Battle of Gettysburg, after a couple of other battles in which he actually performs well. And at the Battle of Gettysburg, he is the lead combat general, the one who's actually out in front. He's not commanding all the Union cavalry, but he's a leading officer in the battle between the Confederate cavalry and the Union cavalry. He shows up in this brigadier general's uniform, a double-breasted uniform, very flamboyant. It's not a regular uniform, but it's black velvet. It has elaborate gold braid winding from the cuff up to the sleeve. A general's uniform was double-breasted. A junior officer's uniform was single-breasted. The fact that he showed up immediately in this outfit with a blue sailor shirt tufting out over the collar, with a bright red tie, it was a very well thought out and elaborate costume. It's not the sort of thing that you buy at a store, just elaborate costumes. He had it in his trunk. He was thinking about the fact that he might become a general when he's in his 20s. This is someone who has, great dreams for himself. And so he appears in this costume. And yet, it's important to remember that, as flamboyant and attention-demanding as it is, a side of Custer that people often scorn him for, perhaps sometimes justifiably, in this case, actually, there was a practical benefit. This is a world, and I try to carry you into that world of that era. This is a world in which the battlefield is much more compact. It's a little smaller than the modern battlefield, which is controlled by modern communications. In this battlefield, there are formations of troops who can see their commanders on the field. Command and control is conducted through sight and sound. That's why the importance of the regimental flag. That's why the importance of trumpeters, buglers, and of bands, which not merely Custer but other generals put great emphasis on. Sight and sound. And to show up in front of his troops, a brigade of cavalry, 23-year-old no one had ever heard of before, in this elaborate costume, it's telling his troops that he believed in his own courage and skill and that he would lead them from the front. Because just as they could see him when he's leading a charge at the front, they would certainly see him if he was leading a retreat to the rear. So this is actually, in some ways, I think, surprising, a declaration of his confidence in himself, and that his belief in his own courage and his own personal fighting skill